The church key incident, or Too Clever by Half, by W.H. Buzzard. The situation at San Jacinto Junior High, whether the intention of school administration or not, was unclear. It was the good cop, bad cop scenario as shown on every 1950s TV cop show made, or close to it, depicting cross-examination situations, only in this case, the good cop was the school principal and his opposite was his assistant. The principal was best friends with all students and so mellow and easygoing he might be mistaken for that famous guru Shah Ramalama Ding Dong down from the mountain. When he visited a classroom, as he often did, a cheer went up and his special fans left their desks to gather around him until the smiling teacher had to restore order. Not a disciplinarian at all, but more like a perpetual candidate running for office who could find a way to agree on any issue, whether for it or against it, with a long-winded non-committal that left both sides stumped. The assistant principal, however, could not have been more dissimilar to his supervisor had Mother Teresa married Joseph Stalin. On the rare occasion when he happened to visit a classroom, no one spoke, including the teacher, but all stared as if seeing an atomic bomb mutation out of a 1950s horror movie, while Henry and other miscreants slunk down in their desk or hid behind an open book that was more than likely held upside down. The vice principal was massively built and moved among students in the hallways like a battleship navigating through Chinese junks. The scowling man's size was enhanced by a curled-lipped smile that showed not a hint of humor. In his presence, all horseplay in the hallways stopped as students pressed back out of his way against lockers, and the troublemakers stared at their feet until he passed. A World War II veteran, rumor had it he survived the first wave at Omaha Beach as the only man from his platoon to make it out alive. He then became General George S. Patton's driver and bodyguard until captured at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. But even more imposing than any of that was the reputation of his paddle. The instrument of pain had originally been a baseball bat, supposedly, plain flat, with holes drilled to lessen wind resistance, as if the inventor worried the plank needed more stinging ability. The paddle's reputation was known solely among male students, as girls got a pass from spankings and instead had to stay after school to erase blackboards. The lucky ducks. After a boy limped home from a paddling, and paddling was a misnomer if there ever was one, he invariably would drop his pants to examine the results in the bathroom medicine cabinet mirror. The black and blue SWAT imprints would have no doubt impressed the SS guards at the vice principal's POW camp, at least in Henry's opinion. Remember, this was in the 1950s when societal opinions regarding corporal punishment were different. Spankings were not only approved of, but seen as a rite of passage, much the same as African tribes send its young men into the bush with only a spear to attack a lion pride and maybe kill one, or be eaten. The scuttlebutt among male students at San Jacinto Junior High School was that after the war, the vice principal was appointed by General George S. Patton administrator of tripartite captors, which meant he oversaw all enemy POWs, mostly Nazis. It was said his treatment of prisoners was so brutal that mortality rates skyrocketed until he was finally relieved and sent home, whether True or not, according to reliable first-hand testimony, the vice principal and his paddle could lift the biggest boy's feet off the ground. Eventually, he ended up breaking a boy's tailbone and was fired, but that was still to come. Bad luck for Henry. The problem started when our anti-hero troublemaker of this narrative was out for a month with mononucleosis, so that he missed the sticker burr craze. Sticker burrs were tall weeds that thrived in winter and by spring produced long stems with rows of spiky sharp seed pods at the ends. When green, the stickery pods could be removed with one painful tug as the stickers clung to the stems. When dry, however, the prickly spurs scattered at the touch like shrapnel off an exploding grenade, in which case they must be plucked one at a time and often left broken thorn spikes embedded. The fad that raged among male students during Henry's absence was called burr chucking. A sport of sorts, there were rules, few though there be, players, strategies, targets, winners and losers. The game began by a stalker, they were called, carefully harvesting a crop of long-stemmed sticker burrs that grew along back fences of residential houses across the playground, or around gas meters, or anywhere the tractor mowers couldn't cut. Who first invented the sport was never determined, but the fun consisted of creeping up on an unsuspecting opponent in the hallway, preferably one carrying a load of books, and seeing how many grass burr stems could be hurled onto the target's back before a teacher rescued him. This brought on spasms of laughter from witnesses at the contortions of not only having been tagged, but the deformities the taggee went through removing the spiny seed pods. Green stickers were generally taken good-naturedly, but dry stickers were for tattletales and sneak thieves and often resulted in fistfights during the lunch period. The gag, if that's the correct term, quickly fell into disfavor among mothers of the taggee who had to remove thorn fragments from clothing on washing day. Complaints started arriving at the administration offices and students were warned to stop. But everyone knows threats without consequences bring no results. So then, printed proclamations were posted that sticker throwers would be dealt with by administration. Male students knew automatically the warnings meant 10 licks or more. The unstated or more meant any sap fool enough to put his hands behind his back protectively to ward off more swats got an extra one. Do it again and get 2 more. Do it again and get 3 more, and so on. As a result, the sport ended, the hallways between classes quieted, students went back to uninterrupted routines, and moms were once again happy on washing day, just in time for Henry to return from his mononucleosis. Although bird chunking was passé, the tagger and taggee antics were relived repeatedly, much like in football, special plays are retold with almost the same excitement. All Henry heard were the uproarious accounts of fun watching the wiggling, gyrating, and yelps of those bushwhacked. To say he felt left out, and especially not having antics of his own to share, was to say Yamamoto had the war in the Pacific won if he'd showed up in San Francisco after Pearl Harbor. Therefore, the one to blame for all the trouble to come, in Henry's opinion, was school administration itself, who, because the posted warnings had been so effective, removed them all before Henry's return to school. Someone should have known he was always up for the latest devilry and had alerted him personally. The result of it all was he couldn't wait for lunch break on that first day back so he could sprint across the schoolyard to the residential home back fences to harvest 3 of the most luscious stems with individual sticker clusters like a community of miniature porcupines. The one problem he found out was in transporting the limber prickly stalks while avoiding the watchful eyes of teachers without becoming self-impaled himself. Something of a genius at resolving these kinds of dilemmas, he invented a way on the spot. He found a piece of notebook paper and fashioned a cone tight at the base and wide at the top, then dropped the stems inside, safe to conceal under one arm. The first pal he came to, he let have it. After relishing the yowl and laughing at his physical contortions, Henry was surprised no onlookers joined in on the merriment. Instead, everyone backed away from him, except for one. His least favorite teacher of all, Henry's chemistry teacher, was smiling or snarling. It was hard to tell which, rather like a hungry coyote spying a squirrel nibbling an acorn. The teacher had been something of an enemy ever since Henry concocted a stink bomb out of hydrogen sulfide that emptied the laboratory. The next period, gym class, a yellow slip was handed Henry, informing him to report at once to the assistant principal's office. After receiving such a notice, many run-of-the-mill students would ditch school and head for home, hoping to convince their parents to move to another district. But not Henry. He'd actually anticipated such would happen one day and planned how to meet the challenge. The idea came to him late one night when he couldn't sleep for worrying what to do when it came his time to meet the dreaded paddle, since his behaving himself was a pleasant fantasy, not reality. Then he had it. During showers, Henry went around to his pals and convinced them to spend the day sockless, most certainly those wearing the thick, fluffy tennis kind. He then carefully layered inside his underwear until convinced he had a rhinoceros-tough rump. He even had his pals spank him with a leather sandal and give it their best. The impacts were barely felt. In theory, then, not only would the vice principal's paddle be rendered stingless, but gone would be the temptation to put a hand behind his back. No worry about extra swats. As a result, he almost looked forward to those eavesdroppers outside the vice principal's office being unable to report the usual yells and pleas for pardons, but only 10 muffled whumps. In no time, word would get around about his John Wayne reputation. With a confidence born of self-assurance, Henry cockily strode into the vice principal's outer office with an uncommon swagger and flirted with a secretary to summon the ogre from his lair. She complied with a coy smile. Upon entering the dreaded chamber, as the inner office was referred to by boys who had been inside previously, Henry greeted the burly man, gripping the paddle with a perky, "Howdy-ho, Captain! Ready when you are." The burly man gave a grumbled response, which Henry passed off as he bent forward, gripping the arm of the lone sofa chair in the room, feet spread well apart. The stance had been publicized often enough among boys at the school. He interrupted the vice principal's routine warning about not putting hands behind his back to avoid more swats with, I know, Captain. Let's get on with it, shall we?" He looked behind and smiled at the vice principal, who stood off to the side with both hands raised in a batter stance, the ominous paddle held high in the air. Alas, things never seemed to go as Henry planned. Even when the odds for success seemed a sure thing, there always came up a flaw. Like the night he and his cousin slept outside in the backyard and heard a patio party several houses down. As a lark, the two reckoned to creep down the alley and disrupt the gaiety by tossing a firecracker over the fence and run for it. What could go wrong? It was a pitch-black, moonless night. By the time anyone got out the alley gate, the two would be in their own backyard pretending sleep. Except the firecracker landed in the drink of one of the partygoers. A police investigation resulted, and the boys turned up the only two in the neighborhood sleeping in the backyard. He and his cousin not only got whipped, but had to mow the injured man's yard all summer until his medical bills were paid off. Or another time, when he and a friend came upon an empty study hall and for a prank threw all the books out the second floor window, figuring they'd scamper away and never be caught. Except the teacher of the classroom was in the classroom below watching the paper and book downpour. That time, they were expelled. Henry's streak of bad luck continued with the first swat, as an agonizing stab reminded him he'd unthinkingly left something in his back pocket. Known as a church key in those days because of the steeple-like opening the tool made in aluminum cans, beer mostly, the sharp point penetrated not only padding but also flesh, making puncture wounds. Needless to say, Henry failed no hands behind the back prohibition amid shrieks of, "Wait, wait, let me first take out the church," earning extra swats. It was said his hee-yahs were heard beyond the offices and even outside the building to those younger kids at PE class who stopped playing dodgeball to listen. For more short clips, plus a 40 visual series raised by demons, plus books, plus videos, go to thereisageneration.com. All one word, thereisageneration.com.